Okay, so we have Josh here. Josh studies wolf behavior. Specifically, I believe the Yellowstone wolves is your specialization.
Oh,
But
pretty
we
much
have you up
everything.
here because we are on a live today on TikTok Live, and we have a lot of people talking about dog canine Canis lupus familiaris, and comparing them to alpha theory, wolf alphas, and wolf pack mentality. And Claus is the perfect person to get into this lengthy conversation and explain it.
Yeah, so thank you. So it's a pretty interesting discussion overall. And to understand the entirety of the alpha theory and the initial conceptualization of the alpha theory, you kind of have to understand where it comes from and what it originally was applied to. So a lot of people think the original alpha term comes from people like David Meach, who was the first wolf biologist to coin the term, but it's more likely that I don't believe that the term was created from these initial studies. It was the first kind of configuration of a social order with a linear dominant structure, which is basically what the original alpha wolf theory described. I believe was first created by a German scientist on chickens. I forget that man's name. And then the alpha term was then later used for primates by people like Rudolf Schinkel, which I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but you get the point. And then eventually in the 1970s, that's when David Meach eventually produced that study on wild wolves. Now, the problem with David Meach's study was due to the fact that there were a couple of different complications with the initial way the study was produced. One is the fact that the configuration of the canines was not natural to what is normally documented in the wild. One thing I will always tell is that study did show that behavior. David Meach's original study, which was in the 1970s and was coined as the first alpha theory study for wolves at the very least, that behavior was documented, and it is a linear dominant structure. So there were individuals that were higher in the social setting. They would control resources. They would be generally the most domineering individuals. They would display more aggressive behavior, and they would compete to reach that status within the social group. Now, the problem with that and later wolf studies was mostly due to how that pack was configured, because in the wild, wolves do not configure to that kind of social configuration, because the pack for that 1970 studies was basically an artificial pack. It was built up of individuals that have no relation. They're of varied age and sex. So from there, you will have that more linear dominant behavior from those individuals because basically it's not a family unit. In your normal wolf pack, wolves are described as familial animals. So your most common wolf pack will be a breeding pair and their offspring. And you won't see a lot of that overly domineering behavior when it comes to these kinds of breeding structures. So the idea of wolves preventing other wolves from eating, hoarding resources, being overly aggressive and domineering to each other, yeah, they don't do that in those normal breeding pair packs. And it doesn't make sense for them to do that. The reason why is because it makes no sense for the parents to prevent their offspring from eating. Now, the reason why I won't say that everything about the initial alpha theory is inherently wrong is because one, that behavior was documented in the initial 1970 study. So it is viewed in certain captive scenarios. But then as well, there is also documented behavior of wild wolves doing it under certain circumstances. So if you have a multi-generational breeding pair or a complex pack, also called a polygamous pack, where there are multiple unrelated breeding individuals living in that pack, you will see a more linear dominant structure between those animals. Now, when it comes to dogs, there's a couple different reasons why the initial alpha study and the wolf studies just don't really work for them. And there's a couple reasons. One, and most importantly, is they are not familial animals. Domestic dogs are not familial. They are, and you can even argue a lot about their sociability. I personally believe the best term to describe a domestic dog based on its social setting is a social opportunistic animal, mostly due to the fact that they don't really require the presence of other dogs to be successful. Wolves, coyotes, most other social wild canids do not do well without other members of their conspecifics. Dogs, on the other hand, can survive very well without the presence of other dogs. So that's one thing. But then as well, they don't configure to that social setting. Wolves are extremely aggressive and very territorial to unrelated conspecifics, whereas domestic dogs are normally very accepting and welcoming of unrelated dogs in close proximity to them. So there's a variety of reasons why the social configuration of wolves and dogs are not applicable. There's a bunch of other things we could reference. The fact that communication is different. Dogs don't communicate the same as wolves. There's some overlapping communication because they're canines in the Canis family, and there's going to be overlapping communication from there. But the social configuration, communication, their niches are very, very different. So it's pretty difficult to just say whatever works for wolves automatically will work for domestic dogs, just because both species are just so different in so many different ways. But not only that, using the term for like alpha or that we're leading them, dogs are aware that we're not dogs. They understand that the concept of a person is not that of we're not really
Hey,
leading a dog into a situation. Like we can guide them and give them experience, but they don't see us a part of the social group. They understand that we are not a dog, and that's why they don't behave like dogs to us. Like I have 4 dogs. None of them behave with me that they do with the other 4 dogs, male to male, female to female, whatever it might be. They don't treat me like another dog. They treat me like a person because they know I am not a dog. And that's basically because we are their niche. We are their methodology of survival. We have a symbiotic relationship with dogs. A symbiotic relationship does not mean that that other species is immediately a part of the social group. So they're not going to behave the same way. So say if there's a group of honey badgers and honey badgers form a symbiotic relationship with a bird called a honey guide, the honey guide will not be treated the same way other honey badgers will. Now, it's like a pretty odd comparison because honey badgers aren't really social animals, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Just because we live in a symbiotic relationship with domestic canines does not mean that they will behave with us in the same way that they behave with other conspecifics. How do we know? It's because they don't know. We are a dog. Can't be just with. So it's mostly due to the fact that you can look at it with the way your dog behaves around other dogs and you. Your dog is not going to do majority of the things that they do in the presence of another dog than they would to a person. I live with multiple dogs, unaltered males, unaltered females, altered females. I live with all kinds of dogs. And no dog will behave the exact same way they behave with other dogs than to me as a person. And this is because they are aware that I am a different species. I don't communicate in the same way. I don't have my body posture in the same way. I move through the ecosystem in a different way, and I provide for them in a different way to how other dogs would provide for each other. So there's a multitude of reasons why dogs are aware that we are not dogs. And so they're not going to act like we're in charge of the social configuration. We are how they survive. We are their ecological niche. And yeah, it's a pretty lengthy thing, but so yeah, that's just kind of how it is. And sorry if it like I kind of derailed the live a little bit, but
no,
that's
you're
the alpha
good.
thing. Yeah, that's the alpha
You,
thing, and why dogs don't really view us as like part of the social group, or at least not to
yeah,
the extent people do.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It didn't derail anything. It's when people, I derail the topic all the time. When people in the comments start going in one direction, I just roll with it.
Yeah, and to that guy's
Yeah, no,
comment,
I mean,
I don't think he's here anymore about the feral dogs. Yeah, feral dogs don't
yeah,
form the same group setting as wolves. Like not at all. Like feral dogs are
no,
they're more applicable to the original like alpha wolf study than an actual wolf pack, just because it's a huge ensemble of unrelated animals just in proximity to each other. They're mostly tied down to like a food source or a general area. Maybe it's a breeding season and dogs are just congregating to find fertile females, but it's not because they're a familial setting. They're not staying together as a family generation or trying to help each other raise and stuff like that. That's not what dogs are doing. They're only together for certain environmental factors. Wolves are together to help increase their likelihood of success by helping family members survive. Dogs don't do that.
Hmm. Yep. No, I agree. I agree 100%. Dogs don't do that. They are again, they're creatures that are motivated by factors that benefit themselves, right? And with that said, that's why they won't stick around to the same group when there's other resources elsewhere, or if they can't get those resources because another dog decides that they don't want them to have the resources, right? Um, one thing I don't know, Claw, Josh, can you tell me a little bit about like wolves and resource guarding? Is that a thing within wolf packs?
Yes, to an extent. I can't say too much about like domestic dogs and resource guarding because
Yeah.
I'm not a trainer, so I'm not going to know the extremes of it. But you do have it's there is documented behavior of in captive settings most commonly where certain individuals will prevent other individuals from eating, and that could be from a variety of reasons. In the wild, preventing social members from eating is actually fairly uncommon, mostly due to the fact that it doesn't benefit wolves to be overly like hoarding of resources because the main way they survive is by having a good social connection to the social group. And hoarding resources is more something that you just see as a captive behavior. So when people say like, "Oh, the alpha male stops the others from eating so that he and the alpha female get like the best parts of the carcass," that's not really true. Wolves will eat all together at the same time. You'll have pups eating with the parents, and they'll be squabbling just like any animal. I mean, just because there's not preventative like resource guarding, that doesn't mean they won't squabble over parts of the carcass. And you might have individuals that take prime cuts of the carcass for themselves. I do know there are a few instances of, say, breeding males like taking like the liver, which for wolves and other canines is a very coveted piece of a carcass, and preventing pups from taking the liver, and he would give it to the dominant female. So sometimes you do see that kind of behavior where an animal will kind of take possession of something and prevent another one from taking it. But what a lot of people attribute that to be with wolves is like, oh, certain individuals are keeping others from eating. In the wild, that's just not really practical for them.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a comment that says, "Then why do dogs stick around abusive owners? They aren't getting resources, but don't leave." My rebuttal to that is because those dogs don't have the capability of leaving. The owner's not letting them escape. They have a fenced-in yard, and so on. If that door was just left wide open with the dog being able to freely leave, I will guarantee they will.
Do wolves still play as they age? Was purpose play just for them, just recreational? Wolves do play as they age. Sometimes it can be just up to the individual. I do know that, especially for like breeding males, which tend to males kind of be a little bit more like stubborn. They tend to be a little less goofy than the females or younger pups. But you do see individuality where some males just tend to be more aloof than others, and others are far more playful. So, but play does have important things for wolves. It is connected to the social ties. It's also for younger animals. Play is very important because it teaches the offspring how to hunt effectively. So, as well, how to fight and all that. So, play has a multitude of different like beneficiaries. It just really depends on the context of why they're playing or what stage of animal they are, like if they're a pup or if they're an adult. It can purely be recreational, just social bonding, or it can actually be informative, teaching them how to hunt.
Yeah.
I saw that Clarence guy. Can everyone? Oh, he had. I think someone answered that one already.
Okay. Let me think. It's a question for the wolf expert. Oh gosh, and he had a little emoji there. This is gonna be good.
I'd love to see this.
Oh, all right, Josh. They say, do you see any inbreeding in these packs?
Rarely. So wolves don't normally inbreed. It's very uncommon, and the thing is breeding is almost entirely controlled by females. Females, if people don't know, are the most dominant individuals in a wolf pack. In most canine like social configurations, females are the most dominant individuals. So they will be the ones that are going to be controlling who is going to reproduce with them. Canines can actually handle inbreeding better than some other species. A lot of people think that inbreeding is just universally bad, and for some animals it is. Like humans, they don't do well under most forms of inbreeding at all. There's a lot of normal, very bad side effects that come from it. But there are some species that do really well with inbreeding. I mean, a species of porpoise called the vaquita is so like low in its population. People have predicted that the vaquita has always just like inbred, and its species is just so good with it that even though there's only like I think 7 vaquitas left in the wild alive today, they can completely rebuild the population just with 7 individuals, all that are like closely related to each other. So inbreeding is variable in species. Some species handle it better than others. Direct crossing is very, very rare with wolves. It's almost like a brink of extinction type stuff, which is normally what pushes animals like that to inbreed so predominantly. But normally, inbreeding is extremely uncommon in wolves. And there are instances of even large males getting pushed away by small yearling females, and the males just taking it because females are more dominant in most cases than males. And then for the breeding, for like the familial structure, when a younger wolf reaches sexual maturity, they typically will not try to change their parents, if it's just a normal breeding pair structure, to become the dominant breeders of that group. They will just leave. That behavior is called dispersal. So they are leaving their social group, they're leaving their natal packs, and they're looking for an unrelated pack to then find a new, like, unrelated animal to start a new pack with. The only times where you might see some changes to this is if there are, I give an example of, let's say that there is, say the original dominant male died. Well, since wolves are familial, they do not tolerate unrelated wolves in their territory. The only exceptions tend to be if there is a breeding vacancy. So say a unrelated male from another pack knows that there's a vacant position for the dominant breeding male. Well, he will come in and the pack will willingly accept this unrelated male because he's now an opportunity for a new breeder. And then after that, you'll actually see competition between the females because at first there was just the breeding female because she was the only unrelated female in the group to the initial breeding male. Well, now that there's a new breeding male, all the females are unrelated to him. So now every female can reproduce and he will breed with every female. And so this is when you have a lot more female on female aggression. And sometimes you'll have members get kicked out of the pack or even killed in female on female related conflicts.
And so is that when you're seeing like the larger packs?
Yes, that is the largest pack that I know of was the Druid Peak pack. And they had 5 breeding females at one point to 1 breeding male. They got up to about 37.
Okay, yeah, because I was just a little bit curious with the inbreeding, because I know that you said it's based on a familial structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know how that played in. If you had some inbreeding in that pack, how that affected the hierarchy in the pack.
So when it comes to the breeding male, from and I've learned this from Josh over here, that when the breeding male dies, that is one of the only times they'll get a wolf from outside of the pack to come in to become the new breeding male.
Yeah, pretty much. The only time unrelated. Now, there are like always, I never really like to say that there are absolutes with animals because in some cases there are just weird exceptions to the rule. And I actually do know an exception to this rule is a male that's actually still alive. His name is, his collar registered ID is 1048. And somehow this wolf has managed to join 3 different packs and has never been killed. And there are always dominant males in those packs. He just never really seems to be treated aggressively. I don't know why, because this is a very big divergence from how wolves normally behave, especially if there is a dominant male already present. But there's always some kind of exception to the rule. So that's why using absolutes is a little difficult. But if you're talking about normal, like what's the most commonly behavior described, then yeah, the only time they'll allow an unrelated wolf is if there's a vacancy for breeder.
Right, that makes sense. I was just curious. So
Yeah. And
And that in
like
itself,
closest case of
sorry.
inbreeding. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the closest case of
Oh,
inbreeding I know with like a wolf pack was, I think, a breeding female reproduced with like a cousin to her. I think they initially thought it was a pup because her dominant male had been killed by a rival pack, and most of her offspring had dispersed. There was just one remaining male. Turns out that male was likely either a distant nephew or a cousin to her, so they did end up reproducing and having litter. And that pack is currently the only pack from the initial 1995 Yellowstone reintroduction that still exists today.
So when it comes to bringing in a new male after the breeding male dies, uh, is that one of the ways they keep from inbreeding?
Pretty much. So, say it's the dominant female that dies, the breeding male will actually leave. He will not stay with the pack. So, a good example of this is with Lamar Canyon. Lamar Canyon had an instance where the breeding female, 832, had died during the 2012 wolf hunting season. And so, after her death, the dominant male, 755, he left the territory, he left the pack, he left everything because all the females in the pack were his daughters or had some relation to him. So, because of that, that's too close to inbreeding. The females wouldn't allow to inbreed with him, even if he tried. So, it's better for him to just leave and try to find an unrelated female to reproduce with. And he tried multiple times. I think he tried to hook up with 3 different females, and they all rejected him. But what happened to Lamar Canyon was a female, 926, eventually became the new dominant female of Lamar Canyon, and the pack just moved on. It's just they changed who the dominant breeders were. Another male from another pack came in and joined 926 as the new dominant breeders, and Lamar Canyon just continued on.
Real quick. So Candace is asking somebody else, but I'll answer anyway. If dogs see us as food sources, then why do they get attached to specific people? It's because those specific people condition the dog as their resource, right? And food isn't the only resource, and treats aren't the only resource, and toys aren't the only resource, and affection and housing. There's so many different resources in the dog's eyes that it enjoys, right? They see the person, they get the chemical emotions, the same emotion or same chemicals that are produced in humans when we feel love. The same things are applied to dogs when they feel good about things, right? And so they get conditioned to that specific individual to feel good, right? That's Pavlovian, that's classical conditioning right there. And so, yeah, they get attached to that person because they're conditioned to get attached to that person based on what that person has given the dog.
What truth do dogs know? I love comments like this that are like,
Oh, yeah.
this way, they just know the truth about mankind. I'm like, wow, that's real philosophy right there. But no,
Philosophical, very deep.
I know, very philosophical. But no, dogs are absolutely selfish. Mammals are just inherently selfish.
Okay.
That's just kind of how they are.
Yeah, yeah. They ask, then how does this make dogs selfish if they are literally no different than us as humans? They are. They are very different than us as humans. Us as humans have the capability of doing selfless acts, right? We do plenty of people do different things that do not benefit themselves whatsoever, right? While dogs will not do anything selfless. They only decide or make their decisions based on what benefits them. Is something to avoid because they don't like it and it's discomforting, and it's something to go towards because it benefits them, right? That's how they learn. That's how their behaviors are. So even if you look at a dog, like let's say it's a police dog or a military dog that loses its life to protect the human, it would not have normally done that. It does that because it was trained to, because we paid the dog to learn that behavior. If the dog knew and was aware that it was going to lose its life, its behaviors and its actions would be very different.
Yeah, there's a lot of variable reasons why domestic dogs do the things they do. It's most commonly because of training. And I mean, is there some like cooperative, which I don't want to say compassionate, because I mean, dogs can show like nurturing behavior and they can be, oh, I'm not arguing dogs are great. I love dogs. I have 4 dogs. But I'm a realist. I understand that dogs are not going to be like selfless movie stars and be like, I'm going to give my life for you. No, no, they don't really understand what they're doing most of the time. They're just trained or bred to think a certain way. Domestic dogs have, for one, they have a greater, like their intelligence has drastically reduced from that of the wild. Wild canines have far better cooperative like capabilities, far better problem solving, far better just innate intelligence than domestic dogs. And then as well, they have far more self preservation. Domestic dogs, from selective breeding have been bred to have less self-preservation. Because let's say I have hunting hounds. Let's say if I have my hunting hounds, do I want one to think like, oh, I don't want to throw myself at a dangerous predator because it can injure me? No, my hunting hounds are going to be like, where is the most dangerous predator that walks the earth? I'm going to chase it and chase it up a tree or chase it up into a corner at the risk of my life without even kind of really knowing it. That's just
So
because they're bred and trained that way.
Candace, you're saying that dogs that aren't trained definitely still protect, not necessarily, unless your dog is trained to protect, they're not protecting. What they're doing is it's a control thing normally, whether it's resource guarding or possession, is what they're doing.
Might also just be a fearful reaction. They're just reacting aggressively towards a fearful
Oh yeah,
stimuli.
yeah. Reactivity, or it's reactivity. I completely sorry. That's my specialization. I completely ignored that aspect. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of people that do say, "Oh, don't worry, my dog's just overprotective." No, your dog's just reactive.
Yeah,
So
sticking in a defense drive, it's like if I challenge that dog, he's likely just going to back off of it, especially if I haven't developed a defense drive into an attack drive or a fight drive. A lot of times when you put pressure on those dogs, what seems like, oh, I'm really tough, turns into I'm going to pee and run backwards.
Yeah, and that's something people don't really know about wolves. Wolves are they're terrified animals. They do not want to risk injury at all. And that's why I've seen a lot of people say they want to get like a wolf dog as like a guard animal. That's like the worst animal to get as a guard animal. Wolves will run away from just about anything because they have so much self-preservation. They are wild animals that want to ensure their own survival. It doesn't benefit them if they're needlessly putting themselves in harm's way because, oh, my person is in danger. And even then, in the wild, it's very rare for wolves to put themselves in a situation where they would get themselves killed for another. I can really only think of a few instances, but even then, that's not because they're acting selflessly. It's just because they're a confident individual. Like I
yeah,
know of one male that just like this very big male, like a 130-pound male, stood between like a pack of 7 charging at him and his dominant breeding female. And it was more just he had never really been beaten in a fight. That's really the only reason he stood and prevented those other wolves from getting to his mate. Not because he was being like, I'm going to save my mistress. He's just like, I've never lost before, so why should I figure I'm going to lose now?
yeah. So just like I said earlier, there is no 100%. This is how it is. There's always going to be outliers, and an example would be the comment. But some dogs don't protect people they don't know. But some dogs, they do know they will. Absolutely. And in some dogs, the outliers, there are some dogs that will protect a human without protection training, but they're not protecting the human because they're a human. They're protecting the human because of all the resources that the dog gets, all the different positives that they. I'm sorry, I cut out. Where did I cut out?
I don't remember. I don't know if it was just on my end or not.
All the
I
different positives that a dog.
yeah. So the reason why some dogs will protect without having protection training is not because it's the human. It's because the dog is conditioned to see the human as their resources, as the positive associations it has in life. So it's protecting that. It's not protecting the person just because it's a person.
And I mean, you can argue that there's some connection between that, but just because there is some connection between them, it's like the dominant male protecting that female. Yes, there is a connection between those two. They were together for like 7 years, so yeah, they definitely formed a bond with each other. But as still, he's protecting her because that's how he reproduces. That's the way he spreads his genes throughout the generation. So it's more than that. That oh, he is protecting her because he loves her. He's protecting her because to him, that female is a key resource. And as well, these are rivals coming onto his territory. So there's multitudes of reasons that you can explain why
Mm-hmm.
a dog might behave in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, breed traits is another one. Breeding those types of behavioral traits goes a long way as well with how a dog is going to behave. Hey, Dan, I know you came up because we're talking about something you have comments on. So what's up?
No, I was rejoining the conversation. I'm just
Oh,
listening.
cool.
I'm
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
holstered.
So
I'm holstered on safety. No worries.
Oh, you're good. So we brought Claws and Cognition is Josh. We brought him up because somebody was talking, comparing dogs to wolves,
Uh-huh.
and he has a lot more knowledge about wolves than I do. So we brought him up. So that's one thing we were talking about. But obviously, as comments go, and you know this, the conversation leads to other avenues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Always fluid.
Yep. So how are dogs selfish? We're gonna have a bunch of those because of the background currently right now.
Yeah.
Because they only do anything in the life in their reality. They only do anything, for their own self gain.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to understand how dogs are in nature to understand their reasoning for things. Canines are opportunistic faculty carnivores. They take advantage of situations. So for a dog, their best interest is what situation benefits their survival. If being with people benefits their survival, then they're going to take advantage of a human setting, just like how other animals will. Coyotes, although they're not domesticated, coyotes absolutely take advantage of human habituation. That's why they're so successful in today's age. So these animals are opportunistic. They see advantages from being around humans and civilizations. So they have become habituated to the sights and smells of human habitation, like cities, farms, urban areas, whatever it might be, and they have thrived because of that.
Yep. If serving you serves the dog, they'll do it all day long.